630 CHED presents The Announcers. Opinion, personality, passion. The Announcers on 630 CHED, Edmonton's breaking news and conversation station.
A good Saturday morning to you. This is episode 2 of The Announcers. J'Lyn,
Howdy.
Andrew, how the heck are you two?
Pretty good. I don't think I've changed my shirt since last week.
I was going to talk to you about that.
Yeah.
Remember we had to talk about the cologne this week?
I know. I've really got to look into expanding my repertoire.
You know what? That's what this show is all about.
All right, great.
Expansion, a half-hour commercial-free to just chew the fat, so to speak. As a matter of fact, it's an interesting jumping-off point.
Wait a second, chew the fat, and he points at me. What the what?
Well, he's the skinny one in the room, so come on.
I qualify as
The
skinny.
camera adds 5 pounds, just so you know.
Actually, the camera adds about 50.
That's what I always tried to tell people.
Yeah.
I saw someone on social media the other day talking about how they're having a real problem with a coworker that's wearing cologne in every single day, cologne into the workplace. So you could actually be proactive if you refuse to wear any sort of deodorant.
I want to put an end to this rumor that I don't wear cologne. And I don't know where, well, I know exactly where it started from. You just threw it out there one day on our show that, oh, Andrew doesn't wear cologne. I wear cologne.
I don't wear cologne. Do you wear cologne every day?
Of course, yes.
He does, but you can't smell it. He just put it in Chanel. We actually had to call his wife. We had to call the kids to find out he's wearing Chanel.
So you're wearing like a fancy.
Yes.
We're both wearing
You're
Chanel.
not wearing Axe body spray and spinning it.
This is the emperor's clothing here. I am paying $200 a bottle, and apparently it doesn't smell of anything.
Well, and then the next day, after we had this discussion on the air, he comes over to my desk and starts hovering around and throwing his neck at me like, look.
Yeah, now in fairness, I actually do that every morning.
Yeah.
But it had a purpose on that
And I
morning.
said,
Well,
what do
you're
you
just-
want? He says, smell me. So I smelled him,
Yeah.
and he did have it on, but it's very faint. But I appreciate
Well,
it.
$200 a bottle, you don't want to be bathing in it. It's just a quick couple of sprays.
But there has
you
been
don't-
that challenge when you work with a coworker who
Yes.
And it's
actually
a
wears it,
little
and it's a
much.
little much,
Yeah.
right? It's like, whoa.
So clearly
enough.
that's not me, though. We've established that.
Well, I mean, some workplaces have eliminated it completely.
Mm-hmm.
They have the scent-free policies. I think
Really?
back to when my first bottle of cologne. I was not messing around. I used to clean my dad's office, and I think I was paid $3 a cleaning at the beginning, which would qualify as child labor. Now they set me up for success later in life, so I forgave them. But I remember saving up all of my pennies and ultimately buying a bottle of Calvin Klein Eternity,
Nice.
which for a grade 6 or a grade 7 kid was quite the coup to have that bottle. And I figured that as soon as you sprayed it, the women would just come calling.
Sure.
That was the girls in grade 6, maybe even up to grade 8, if you know what I mean. It wasn't until my always helpful older cousin Courtney intervened and said, hey, Rye, sweetheart, just because you can't smell the cologne anymore doesn't mean you need to keep spraying it. Apparently, it had become overpowering at family reunions.
And the word eternity didn't give you a clue that it should last forever?
It should stick around forever.
It's not today.
I'm just impressed that it was eternity and that you're the Chanel because guys my age, and when I was in high school and grade 8, it was pure Polo Ralph Lauren. Remember that green bottle of Polo Ralph Lauren?
Brut?
Actually, Brian Hall still
Yeah.
wears Polo by Ralph Lauren.
Really?
I can smell it.
I've said on the record, and I'm sticking to my guns, that I will trade my wardrobe straight up right now for Brian Hall's wardrobe.
Are you the same size? I know your heads are different.
I don't know the heads.
He has a little more hair.
Whose is bigger?
I don't. I have no opinion.
I'm the last one to be saying anything about size of heads and hair, so I'll just back away.
One of the reasons I know that we're so excited to be putting this brand new program out to CHED Nation every Saturday morning from 9 to 9:30 is it gives us a chance to revisit some of the topics that we would have left a little bit more time for had we had that luxury on our own shows. And I know the two of you on the afternoon news this last week had a lot of traction on this so-called Idaho stop that a bunch of people here in Alberta want
Now,
to see.
can I ask, did everyone know what an Idaho stop was?
I still don't know what it is, Andrew.
Oh, excellent.
It's kind of the rolling stop for cyclists, right?
Well, it's a rolling stop for anyone, but it's the cyclists who want an Idaho stop specifically just for them. They want the law amended so that it would be legal for just cyclists to not have to stop at stop signs or red lights if they perceive that there's no danger to them in the intersection.
Because they don't want to slow down their momentum, and it's difficult for them, apparently, to unclip their shoe, put their foot down, and then having to clip their shoe back in. And what they're saying is that they slow down the traffic behind. So if they could just do this, it would be great.
Okay, but just cyclists, so we're clear. Nobody's
right.
advocating
Yes.
that motorists would be allowed to. Why is it called the Idaho stop? Because it's legal down there?
in Idaho.
Yeah.
So you're allowed to do that.
Yeah, and it's an odd one because it's one of those stories that it was sort of, I thought, maybe a funny aside sort of story, but a story that got a lot of traction, as you just said, a lot of texting and a lot of angry texting. There seems to be this animosity growing in Edmonton, not just on this specific
against
thing,
cyclists in general.
Against cyclists. There seems to be the laws, or the lines have been drawn between motorists and cyclists. And I don't know if it's over the bike lanes originally, or I don't know what caused this, but there's some anger there between people who drive cars and people who drive bikes.
It is. We don't share the road very well. I think that would be fair to say. And I think that motorists get really ticked off because they'll be slowed down by the cyclists or they're riding in packs. Out at my place, this is a challenge because I live on the outskirts of town. And they're always out there and in packs, traveling in packs. They're not getting off the road. They're not doing it into single file. You're trying to get around them, all of that sort of stuff. They are doing Idaho stops out by my place. And as I'm coming up to the four-way stop, they're to the right of me, and they're rolling through and flipping me the bird as they go by.
Someone's giving J'Lyn Nye the bird.
I
thought you were like Edmonton's golden daughter.
She is.
Yeah, hardly.
They obviously
Hardly.
didn't recognize you.
What's the tinted windows?
They didn't see the hair flying
in the
all
back
over
of the
the
limo.
place.
I
No,
mean,
no.
the one consistent message that I get, and I will say that I own a bike, which I suppose technically qualifies me as a cyclist, though I'm more inclined to drive my car, if I'm being honest with people. I think it's really too bad that the groups can't get along, but I get where some of the basic disdain from both angles comes from. One of the things that I immediately see as being problematic here is it leaves it up to the discretion of the cyclist as to whether or not it's safe to execute this so-called Idaho stop. In other words, if you deem it safe or okay, acceptable to roll through the stop sign, then you can. Well, people have different opinions. I mean, just look at how motorists operate. If you said to someone, use your discretion to determine the speed limit on the highway, people would have very different viewpoints on what would be safe.
And that's where it becomes a conflict, because it seems like cyclists continue to want more rights without responsibility. There's no license to drive a bicycle.
No insurance.
So, no insurance. You don't have to do any of those things. But when it's convenient to a cyclist, they want to be treated as though they are a motorist. And as soon as you say, okay, well, if we accept your argument, cyclists, that you're a motorist, same as I am, then why don't I get to roll through stop signs and red lights? I'd love to be able to do that.
I agree.
I have the same decision-making ability as you do. So it just doesn't seem right to me. And besides which, what if the cyclist deems it safe to go through the intersection, but the pedestrian doesn't know that? You know, now you have a little old lady stepping off the curb and a cyclist coming down a hill flying through the red light. But having said all of that, I think we have some of the worst drivers in the country. You know, so I mean, all these people who complain about cyclists and how they don't follow the rules, it's a rarity if I were ever to drive from CHED to home or home to CHED and see nothing but great drivers. You know, in fact, I would say that cyclists would be better off not having the Idaho stop, because they're probably going to start getting planted in the intersection by all these drivers not driving correctly.
I just think that like stop has to mean stop.
Yeah.
And once you start making it arbitrary, and whether or not you include motorists in the legislation, which you know they never would do, it's not going to happen. And for that reason, it's probably not going to happen for cyclists either. But once you introduce that sort of arbitrary, almost case by case perspective on when you need to stop, who's at fault for accidents, who's liable for these types of things, it's an absolute brouhaha.
Yeah, and you know what? I mean, if a cyclist is coming up to a four-way stop and there is no vehicles around and they do it, they're going through, okay, you're doing it already. Obviously, that's what that cyclist has done out at by my place over and over again to think that he could do it again. But the fact of the matter was, at that point, he was coming this way and I was going, we would have, if I hadn't looked up, I would have proceeded on it, and I could have nailed him right in the middle of the intersection. So that's just not cool. And I think to myself, all the motorcyclists, same thing. We're on two wheels. We have to come up. We have to take our hands off. We have to put our foot down when we're coming up to a stop sign. How is that different than a cyclist having to put their foot down, unclip, and go down?
Don't they still have to take a special test? Don't they have to do a special road test?
Motorcyclists.
Motorcyclists, yeah.
So why wouldn't cyclists then?
Right.
If we're giving them all the rights and responsibilities of a motorist, why don't they have to take any kind of a test, license their vehicle, or insure? Because in the scenario you just said, you nail the bike. Who's paying for that? Who's paying for the damage to your car? If you were
Probably
not at
me.
fault? You are, right.
Andrew,
Cyclist has no insurance.
I can't disagree with what you're saying at all. As a matter of fact, I completely do agree. I do agree with people that text into both of our shows. Of course, if you're just joining us, hanging out with J'Lyn Nye and Andrew Grose from the Afternoon News, Ryan Jespersen here with you. People text into 630 and say, you know what, this is quite frankly BS, that cyclists are getting these investments of bike lanes. The city's, as a matter of fact, reversing some of its bike lane plans with incurred costs there and then rolling out a new plan. And people are saying, how can we not partially pay for this with bike licensing? And why are cyclists not held liable by having to not only license themselves, but also carry insurance, as you've pitched out here today? Now, on the flip side, don't we then see ourselves introducing deterrents to people actually using their bikes? Don't we see ourselves putting up hurdles that could stand in the way of even basic initiatives for, say, physical fitness? Do you really want to make it more difficult for people to get out on their bikes?
No, and I get that the upside of more cyclists, it benefits the city. It takes cars off the road. It takes people off the LRT and buses. It makes
Pollution,
traffic
all
flow.
that sort of stuff.
Yeah, there's all kinds of upsides to it. I'm at a loss as to why the city hasn't cashed in on the licensing of it. You don't have to license the individual, but certainly you could license the bike.
Maybe because of how you phrased it, though. Maybe because they know that it would come across as cashing in.
I guess, but are we worried that the cyclist is going to be out $20 for a license for his bike when we spent how many hundreds of thousands on bike lanes and then another tens of thousands taking them down again? I don't really understand. The bike lanes do not benefit everybody. They benefit cyclists. But I get as a citizen that it makes us a better city. But I think cyclists at the very least should be good for $20. I mean, I'm good for $20 per cat in my house. They don't even go out of the house.
Yeah.
You know?
And you know what? And licensing says I really like the idea of some sort of insurance of something just to cover everyone's butt in case something happens.
Sure, even if they took that money and put it into a pool for uninsured cyclists, something.
We had a case not too long ago, and I forget all the details of it in this city, but a cyclist was in an accident and trying to figure out how everything is going to be covered. A friend of mine, cyclist came across the sidewalk.
Vicky
I can't remember
Venancio, I think is her name, the temporary foreign worker that was hit on her way to McDonald's riding her bike.
That one,
different
but
story.
Still, right? I mean, and that's
there's another example.
A friend of mine, her Jeep, cyclist was coming down on a sidewalk, didn't get off to walk across the crosswalk, nailed right into the intersection, nailed the side of her Jeep.
I just have to say, if we start requiring cyclists to carry insurance, people aren't going to do it. They're just not going to do it. I will say where I went to university, there was on campus bicycle registration. And if you didn't pay, forget about, that was in Langley, BC, forget about what the township of Langley or the city of Langley had to say about it. That university said, no, if you want to ride your bike on campus, and more importantly, if you want to use our bike racks, you have to have it licensed. And you paid whatever it was, let's say $20, I don't remember, and you got a sticker and it went on your bike, and they would have, the university, their law enforcement, their university patrol would go around, and if your bike was locked up and you didn't have a sticker, bolt cutters were out, bike was gone.
Really? I'm actually glad to hear that. And that was the case when I was a boy. We would have to go down to the local skating rink on the first Saturday of September or whatever it was.
Did you walk hills both ways?
Yeah, exactly right.
Yeah.
Without having
it was always snowing.
Yes, and we'd have to cycle around the inside of the rink, no ice on it, of course, and pass a test and then pay for our license.
Yeah.
It was actually a really good day. Like that was a great day because you had your new bike. I guess it was in spring, not fall. You'd get your new bike, and then you'd take it down to the rink, pass the test, get the license, and you'd usually get a handout about bike safety. The problem I have with all of this is the pendulum keeps swinging back and forth. Back and forth. We're not a good city for cyclists, so let's build bike lanes and let's let them run through red lights and let's do all this. And then people go, wait a minute, that's crazy. Oh, let's go the other way. Get rid of the bike lanes and not, let them run. Can we find a happy medium here somewhere?
And it doesn't help either that there are advocates. There are like the Edmonton Bicycle Commuter Society, for example, and there are those that understand lobbying and they understand building a rapport with city officials and they understand public messaging. And then, as is the case with any special interest group, and we'll include drivers advocates in this conversation as well, there are those who go into it with very polarizing attitudes and they do a disservice to the entire conversation.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And everybody acts as though, and we've all had these guys on our show, and we've given them their chance to state their cases, but they seem incredulous to the idea when you start to suggest that they should have fewer rights or that everything's the driver's fault, the motorist's fault, and everybody should see their point of view. And I agree with their point of view that many motorists are not good drivers, and it makes it unsafe for cyclists, and that's why I agree with bike lanes. But I don't agree with this Idaho stop bringing this whole conversation around, because it seems to me that just is making it unsafe for everybody.
And then even when you talk about bike lanes, and I know you know this because I listen to your show, you can't just have a conversation about bike lanes. You've got to talk about where they are and the purpose they serve and what they look like. You talk to a business owner that's had parking in front of their business, and now that parking is being taken out to accommodate bike lanes, they're going to flip out whether they're a cyclist or not. It's a polarizing conversation. Now, when we talk about drivers, to be fair, we should talk about those behind the wheel of motor vehicles as well. Police chiefs across Canada are saying this is the year, 2015 is the year where texting and driving or distracted driving accidents will outnumber drunk driving accidents for the first time, specifically when it comes to the statistics around traffic fatalities. The province of Ontario has just introduced tough new legislation. Tickets for distracted driving on a first offense will range from $300 to $1,000 and include 3 demerits. The toughest Canadian province or jurisdiction on distracted driving is Prince Edward Island, in fact, where tickets range from $500 to $1,200 and carry a whopping 5 demerits. Alberta, the easiest of all the provinces and territories on its distracted drivers, $172 fine and 0 demerits.
We need to get on board with this. I'd like to see. I agree with what the other provinces are doing, absolutely, and I think something needs to be done. And if that's what it's going to take, whether it's going to be cash, I like the demerit points especially, but I think that is a step in the right direction, absolutely.
But when you hear a statistic like this is what it costs you to be distracted in the province of Alberta or in Prince Edward Island, and I like the Prince Edward Island rule. I think it should. That's stiff enough. That's good. The other statistic that has to go with it is how many tickets were issued. Because you can make it $1 million for distracted driving. If nobody's issuing a ticket, it's not changing anything. And I cannot tell you, and I know you all, everyone listening, everyone watching, and us all in this room, you see distracted driving all around you. It amazes me.
I almost want to say, Andrew, that everybody's doing it.
Yes.
I know that's a defeatist attitude.
I know, but it sure seems that way. How many times do you have to honk to get the guy ahead of you to go ahead and make the left-hand turn, or you see the guy lane change without a signal? I saw somebody just yesterday blow through a red light at Rabbit Hill and Terwillegar, and I often have seen accidents at that intersection, and every time I do, I think to myself, how could that possibly have happened? That's a huge intersection. It's a huge intersection. With all kinds of controls on it.
Yep.
Well, that's exactly how it happens.
You know why it happens? It's because when people hit the open road, as soon as there's lots of room, then people think this is a great time to check my Facebook. Yeah. Right? Yeah. Or at a red light, I should check to see who's retweeted my last tweet, or I wonder who's liked my post on Instagram. But we're not talking about legislation where we say, too many people have their windows tinted and police can't see in and they need to crack down. We're talking about, as mentioned, what police chiefs are saying is more of a pervasive problem than impaired driving, yet we're not taking it seriously. You can't tell me a $172 fine with 0 demerits.
Right.
Is taking anything even remotely seriously here in the province.
Do either of you still check your cell phones while you're in your vehicle?
No, but I'll tell you, I mean, it's there. I've got a holder that's within my view.
Yeah.
And so I see if somebody has texted or somebody is phoning. But I'll tell you, even this morning, coming here, I pulled over to answer some questions by text and almost got rear-ended by somebody on the white mud who had drifted into the shoulder a little bit. It's so out of hand.
I'll admit to I used to. I would go by and I'd take a look at something. If something came through, and I'd put it back down into my cup holder. I had a scare not too long ago, and I was doing that, and the light was red, and I came to a pretty quick stop. And I thought to myself, okay, that's it.
So you're that guy.
That is absolutely it. And here's the thing: I've had a family member killed by someone who was believed to be texting while driving. This was in Ontario. My Auntie Marion and her best friend were in the back seat with my Uncle Alan and the other person's husband, and were killed. And it was believed that the other person was texting at the time. So, and that wasn't enough to do it for me. It was that own personal scare up here at the intersection at 91st.
I will say that, for example, these days where it's so convenient to have like the Google Maps app on your phone, so you're using it as your navigation tool, that it's highly unlikely for someone to suggest that they will never or have never used their phone behind the wheel. I've used the Google Maps tool, certainly. When I take a call, I try to put it on speakerphone and put it in my shirt pocket, so technically it's hands-free driving. I'm not sure actually what a police officer would say about that. As far as I understand it, I'd be in the clear with that approach. I know that like Bluetooth technology, for example, would be the same sort of a thing with a microphone and speakers through your car where you can go hands-free. What really was a wake-up call for me, and I'd encourage our listeners to actually check this out, as a matter of fact, as soon as this show wraps. You can find it on YouTube for free. That documentary filmmaker, Werner Herzog, tackled this in a 35-minute short film simply called From 1 Second to the Next. And if you haven't seen From 1 Second to the Next, brace yourself before you watch it, because he catches up with not only bereaved persons, in other words, those that have lost loved ones to distracted drivers, but he talks to distracted drivers who have claimed people's lives.
Interesting.
And there's one story of a man who says he simply was typing one sentence on his phone. He rear-ended an Amish family in a horse and buggy, and his life has never been the same. That's one that jumped out at me. But you have to watch it from 1 second to the next.
Well, you know, the big difference, you're talking about Google Maps and other things. I don't think your speedometer is distracting. I don't think your gas gauge is distracting. I don't think that a phone in a holder giving you verbal instructions on where to turn is distracting. It's the engagement with the device that's distracting. The trying to find the send button,
trying
or
to
typing.
type while you're driving.
Those are the things that obviously can't happen anymore. But I would love to see enforcement. I honestly, I don't even care what the amount of the ticket is or the number of demerits at this point. I just want to see it enforced. I want to, and how is it possible that I see it all around me and police don't? There's something, I think, preventing police from writing a whole lot of tickets.
And a whole bunch of people get upset because police are on their phones all the time too. I understand they've got to do their job. I'm not trying to be, throw a red herring into the argument, but I do think that I do think that there's a big gray area here when people see police officers on their phones behind the wheel of their car. Listen, they're going to say we're trained drivers, this, that, and the other. Everybody thinks they're a great driver. It's either dangerous or it's not.
Yeah, absolutely.
Michael, and I agree with you 100% on that one. My other thing this leads to, though, is police budgets, and do we have enough police officers on the streets to do what we want them to do?
In other words, you can't have photo radar giving people distracted driving tickets?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'd be up for that. If you see the phone in their hand, they get that ticket on top of the...
as far as I'm concerned, I walk my dog every single day. You could have a police officer standing next to a crosswalk and just pulling people over from there. You don't need to have... there just needs to be some sign that we're taking this seriously. When it gets to the point where they can statistically say this will trump drunk driving, how have we come to understand over the last 30, 40, 50 years how we need to approach drunk driving? We've understood that messaging and PSAs don't work. You need to crack down. People need to be looking at jail time.
But Ryan, look how long it has taken.
Decades.
Decades and decades, and people still do it.
So people are going to die this year.
People are going to die next year.
They're going to die next year, and they're going to die. And then maybe finally at some point, we'll take it seriously.
That's sad.
I just don't want to see Alberta at the bottom of the list on anything in Canada.
For sure.
Right now, we're leading the charge with a deficit. We know that. We hear that from Premier Brad Wall, just east of here. We're all too aware that we're at the bottom of the list, or at the top, depending on what the list is. When it comes to deficit, I'd like to see our legislators actually pay attention to our police chiefs and to our police officers on the street. And I'd like to see more of a leading edge here in Alberta. People are praising Ontario. People are praising Prince Edward Island. I'll tell you, if I'm looking at a $1,200 fine and 5 demerits, considering a license suspension comes after 15 demerits, that's something I'd probably take a little more seriously.
Going in my purse.
Amen.
Your man
The
bag.
Announcers comes at you every Saturday morning from 9 to 9:30, uninterrupted by commercial breaks. And of course, if people want to get in touch with the two of you or me, it's only an email away at 630ched.com. It's a great way to reach us, of course, Twitter as well. And while we're live on the air, myself from 9 to noon and you two from 2 to 6, you can take text messages at 6:30,
Seems like
6:30.
a lot longer show than yours.
It does, doesn't it? How did you... Who negotiated your contract?
You guys need better agents. The Announcers only here on CHED.